Great. Thank you so much. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes,
Great.
I can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for confirming. So thank you so much for being here today from all over the world, from different time zones. It's really an honor to be in this space with you. Climate leaders from so many different countries. My name is Louisa. I work with Friends of the Earth United States, and I will be facilitating this session today. As many of you know, we're here as part of the Global Grassroots Leaders Summit, which is being organized by the Sierra Club and Friends of the Earth United States as a response to President Biden's Leader Summit, which was in April, to which he invited 40 heads of state from around the world. But this time, we wanted to hear from climate activists and leaders from around the world, many of you who have been leading this work for many decades, and we see you as the true global climate leaders. So the idea behind this summit is to provide a platform for you to share your experiences, your concerns, and your demands to the US government. As we know, the US government spends billions of dollars a year financing fossil fuel projects overseas. But in this session in particular, we don't just want to talk about what we don't want the US government to finance. We also want to talk about what we would like the US government to finance. And we don't only want to focus on the bad, we also want to try to lift up the good and make a case for more aspirational things that we would like to see happening. So in this session, we'll have 1 hour to talk about renewable energy finance, your experiences, what role you would like to see the United States play. And this session is being recorded and it'll be streamed on our social media channels tomorrow so that millions of people will be able to hear your experiences, hear from your wisdom and your demands. So I have a couple of questions to get us started in this conversation about renewable finance. And I just ask that when you speak, you first introduce yourself, say your name, maybe any organizational affiliation you may have, and what country you are calling in from, just so that our audience can know. So thank you so much again for being here. And my first question, just to get this conversation started, is what are some of the energy needs in your country or your community, and what kinds of investments would you like to see the US making? So whoever would like to get us started, you can indicate in the chat or raise your hand or just jump in. Yes, Sridhar, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah. If we really need money in India, it is for distributed renewables and to look at how to do this in a significant way. Especially, we know that technologies like biogas can be a very huge game changer in rural India, while our governments are trying to make money, pushing LPG into rural areas, which is unreliable. Similarly, distributed, end-use oriented kind of energy systems, where there is quite a bit of research and small but investments across large kind of areas through small groups. India now has a lot of these producer companies which are working with agricultural communities, with other producer groups. So these are areas where they are investment starved, and they also don't have the kind of skills to market themselves to the financiers. And since these require dealing with a large number of people, most banks and other people are also not interested. So ultimately, we are ending up with, even if it is renewable energy, we are ending up with large amount of land grab, impact on biodiversity, those kind of things. So where we would like to see investment, it's very clearly distributed people or community owned renewables. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sridhar, for your comments. And I do have a couple of follow-up questions, but I want to open the floor to others who may want to have remarks about, what are some of these energy needs and what kinds of investments you would like to see the US making. Any others? Matthias
Yeah.
or Prince?
Hello. Hello.
Let's go
Thank
Matthias and then Prince. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Louisa. I think this is a very critical topic, and when we are talking about climate change, this being a summit for climate change, energy plays a very critical role in either creating a problem of climate change or reducing the problem. So it is on both sides. If we lack access to cleaner energy, like renewable energy and other sources of clean energy, it means then people have no alternative. They have to cut down trees to make charcoal and everything to have access to energy for cooking and the other uses. So I think it is important when you are talking about this is a critical investment that we expect the US government and the other agencies that belongs to the US government to work in making sure that we push the access to energy, especially for the rural people who predominantly they depend on natural resources as source of energy, like charcoal and cutting down firewoods from trees. So I think it is important for the US government to focus on investing on cleaner energy. And Tanzania, in terms of distribution of electricity to rural areas, we have improved from few years. Now we are almost at 85%. That all villages in rural areas have access to electricity, but there is still a need for making sure that household within the village have also they have this affordable energy and they have access, because what we are seeing right now is that electricity can reach to a certain village, and it is only channeled to government institutions like hospitals, or it is channeled to a school, and to few people who lives at the center of the village. But you find a number of people, more than 70% or 75% of the people in the village, they have not yet accessed that energy, and therefore they are continuing to use other sources of power to power their cooking and the other things. But we also want energy for rural people, not just for lighting bulbs in their homes. We want them to power also their economy, and we want them to use for production, so that it can also contribute to poverty reduction. So I think the issue of energy is very critical, and I think for Tanzania, we can invest in solar energy because we have potential for that. We can also invest in wind energy because we have potential for that, but we also have potential for hydropower energy because we do have some areas that are very potential for this. So I think for the side of Tanzania, I think the government has a plan for energy plan, which is mixed, different with different approaches like wind energy, solar energy, but we have not seen much investment on solar energy or renewable energies. We have seen more investment on hydro, electric power, and not much of solar or wind energy, which we do have really potential for that, because hydro also involves a lot of environmental destruction. But if we invest in solar and wind energy, I think it is the clear and we have potential for that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for sharing that. I'll pass it on to Prince. I believe you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Prince Papa. I am based in Nairobi, Kenya. Currently work with the Global Catholic Climate Movement as the regional coordinator for the African region, and previously worked with 350.org under the same capacity. What I see the US as a country, or as the government of US can play in this, when I look at climate change, I see US having three various roles to play. One will be the immoral position, that the moral position that the US should take, in a sense that US is one of the most highly contributors to climate change when it comes to their CO2 emissions. So they should take that moral decision to salvage what they have caused. And this brings me into the second point, salvaging what they have caused. If I look at Africa, where I work, and this applies to several poor, developed, or underdeveloped countries, we look at adaptation to climate change. And the morality comes in that US and amongst other developed nations, taking a moral stand will include adaptation. We need climate finance to facilitate adaptation. So this brings the three roles that the US can play. One, take the moral stand, ownership of the chaos that they have caused, and two, providing or facilitating for poor countries, the most impacted countries, to adapt to this. And last one, on climate finance, providing the necessary finance to facilitate this adaptation. And connected with this is what the previous speakers have talked about, renewable, but I will stress on providing free or accessible technology, like technological transfer to these countries, because the technology comes from mostly comes from developed nations. The cheaper it is for Africa or other poor or underdeveloped countries, the more easily we will be able to cope with the current situation. So these are my demands to the US government, and I know they know this already, but coming from different people, it's the same thing the two previous speakers have talked about, but now in a different language. If they can own up to this, then we will be able to safeguard, or we will be able to mitigate both the impact as well as speeding up the process of reducing our emissions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prince Papa. That was a really clear roadmap for the US government. And like you said, maybe they know all of this, but maybe they don't. And it's really important that they are hearing your voices today. So thank you so much for all of you. Mumbere, did you want to add anything to this initial question?
Yes, thank you. Mine would be on accessibility of energy, and then the patents on the renewable energy technologies. If we could reduce restrictions on the patents or share them, then we would reduce on the energy poverty. It can't always be the ability to make more solid energy solutions based on the challenges that they are facing in their region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mumbere. So thank you so much to all. Some of the comments that you were all making made me think of a follow-up question, which is, what are some of the challenges or barriers that you see to increasing renewable energy in your country or in your community? You know, we've heard about this lack of investment, investment starved, I think was the phrase that was used. But what do you see as being some of the other barriers? And Prince Papa, also to his point about, you know, the lack of a moral position and the lack of climate finance. But would love to hear any more thoughts on what you see as being the barriers and challenges to increasing this, or for the US to move on this. Does anyone want to take that question?
Maybe I'll attempt. I'm Sridhar from Environics Trust in India. What we think is, you know, like it was pointed out, it's a moral and ethical question. It is more a kind of ecological debt and not something, you know, in modern terms, investments means it's again a debt instrument. What developing nations need is reparations and not, you know, more debt that is created on the people. That's precisely what I wanted to say.
That's really powerful. Thank you so much, Sridhar. So Sridhar was talking about the need for reparations, moral reparations, as he, you know, has been rightly pointed out that the United States is the largest historic contributor to climate change. Thank you. Did anybody else want to share what are the challenges to increased investment? I think we heard folks saying also that there hasn't been enough investment in solar and wind. You know, what are the reasons for that, do you think?
Okay. Thank you, Luis. I think for on the side of Tanzania, this lack or the barriers that leads to lack of increase in renewable energies investment is also on the side of just the political will, the political direction of the country. The last administration, when we started a big project, a multi-billion project on hydro energy, was really challenged not only in Tanzania but globally. That why you should embark on such a bigger project in the World Heritage Facility in Selous Game Reserve, while there are other alternative sources of energy that can equally give you the same amount of energy that you need. But there was no political will to accepting this idea of investing in renewable energy instead of focusing on hydroelectric power, regardless of the negative impacts that were outlined by different people, and even those activists on climate change and environmental activists, and even the opposition parties in Tanzania who were against that. And they gave a lot of convincing proposals why Tanzania should abandon that project. But again, the administration is still focused on the same. So I think there is a lack of political will to invest on renewable energies. And I don't know what is the reason, because Tanzania as a country, we have a really bigger potential for solar energy, and we have a really bigger potential for wind energy. There are a lot of areas that have been researched, and they are really potential for producing a large amount, I can say, of energy from renewable sources. So I think also lack of political will could be one of the reasons that or barriers that are putting in place of increasing renewable energy access in Tanzania. But again, on the other side, I think there is a huge business in other sources of energy, like gas. You know, people are trying to use natural gas also as one of the potential source of energy in Tanzania, and there is a lot of business on that side. So I think there's no, and some of the politicians, big politicians, have invested on distributing gas in the country, and therefore they don't see investing on renewable energies probably could bring a disaster to their business. So they think probably they have influence in the government, and therefore they can also influence the direction of the government in this. So I think it is important for us as CSOs to continue pushing toward this direction, because I think renewable energies is so sustainable compared to these other sources of energy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for your very strong contributions. Did anybody else want to weigh in on this question of the barriers? I think Matthias was speaking to political will. Very important, right? It's not just a lack of the technology. It's not that the finance doesn't exist. It's that specific political decisions are being made, right? And these decisions could be made to other ends. Did anybody else want to add any words to this question?
Yeah. In Africa, we talk when we talk about electricity and accessibility. We see the U.S. institutions, and I want to point okay, I'll go ahead, Mumbere. The U.S. institutions, I want to point out at GE, General Electric, that initially wanted to invest in a proposed coal power plant in Kenya. And this trend is highlighted, or it cuts across any major U.S. institutions investing in the energy in Africa. These are businesses, and they go for government tenders. They go for mega projects. And in Africa, when we talk about mega projects, we know what in terms of accessibility, mega projects will feed into the national grid. But in Africa, the national grid does not reach everyone. If we talk about accessibility, accessible and cheap and fair or charged electricity, this is not something that is already there. So if we look at the policies around mega projects, mega electricity projects, these ones target the economy. I think who is from Tanzania, Matthias from Tanzania alluded to this, that we look at the economy, the bigger economy, and not looking at the people, the constituents that make up this economy. And what we should be focusing now, for those people, communities that still depend on on fuel wood for energy, we have to look at how accessible this electricity is going to be. And I want to bring in the issue of decentralized energy or community-owned energy that will go, like ownership and distribution and things like that, remain with the ownership. But the policies we have in many African countries, these policies bring back the power or the control of energy to the central government. And this central government still operates under colonial kind of leadership or rules or laws that were there. And these laws were not so much in the favor of everybody, especially the poor. If the US institutions will really like to look at the issue of accessibility, then we should look at investing in decentralized or community-owned systems of energy to also, this will have an impact on the normal person, those who in the rural villages cutting down these trees and charcoal burning and things like that, to be able to afford the electricity from within their community grids, as opposed to what is happening now.
Thank you so much, Prince Papa. You raise a really important point about power, and the flows of power between these institutions, and that's another systems change that we need also, right? Power in both sense of the word, not only power in the sense of energy, but also power in the sense of these big corporations that you mentioned, GE, and also government power. And I hear your point on decentralization, and I think Srihard had also mentioned earlier the importance of community-owned distributed energy. So thank you so much for touching on that. Your comments make me think also of a follow-up question for all of you, which is, how do you think that the US should involve communities in these energy decisions, in this decision making? So this has more to do about engagement, right? I think we've heard a lot about how rural communities are not being at the decision making table and their needs are not being met. So what would be your ask to the US government about how they should go about making these decisions to finance energy abroad in a way that includes these communities who are being left out?
So let me jump in. One thing or one area that will ensure this is what we term as community participation. I don't know what that means in other countries, but involving and inquiring from the real community affected persons on what kind of energy investment they deem feasible for their communities. And this can be brought via one way, providing information, open and accessible information, accessibility in terms of both language and content of what this energy investment means. What we've seen is that corporations, multinationals come to Africa, and the information that they share is the information that favors their business, the information that will ensure that the communities only hear about things like job creation, because they know how many African countries are poor and the population, higher population percentage is poor. When you talk about job creation, you talk about development, then they will buy. There will be no opposition to this. So they only show these communities one side of the coin, while hiding and ensuring that no community member knows what is lying on the other side of the coin. So if the communities are able to look at both the negative and positive impacts of these investments, then the communities will be able to make an informed decision. What we see now is what I term energy colonialism, that we just bring you what you want to hear, while we will not even fulfill our promises. If I want to bring the example of the job creation, everybody, or not everybody, but a higher percentage of people in Africa, when you talk about job, that is the number one disease in this country, in this continent, and everybody wants job. Everybody, I mean, over 90% wants job. If you talk about job and job creation, everybody will be interested in knowing this. But energy investment in Africa, when you talk about job creation, these multinationals will ask you to apply for jobs that do not respect human dignity. You know, they give you the jobs, they are telling you, yes, they are there, but what type of jobs are these? They are jobs that lower the human dignity, and the jobs with higher dignity goes to them themselves. So if you look at this, when a community member knows that I, as Prince Papa, the only job I will get from this corporation is being a cleaner, being a cleaner, whilst the multinational will bring a CEO then of course I will have questions to ask. But if you just tell me a blanket job is coming, the first thing is that I will look at the job in terms of a job that will bring some dignity to myself. So open information to all this will help us really tackle this issue.
Thank you so much, Prince Papa, for that very important points. And I heard, energy colonialism and a lot of talk about job creation that they bring, but this information is not open and accessible, and not always very sincere in what they mean of the nature of these jobs that don't afford a lot of dignity. So thank you so much for raising those important points. Matthias or Sridhar, did you want to add anything about, what is the process? Go ahead.
Yes.
Yeah. I think.
Okay.
Go ahead, Sridhar, and then Matthias.
All right.
Yeah,
all right.
I think the concept of free prior informed consent is something that is fundamental, and the U.S. government should say that it will not fund or invest in any project where a proper free prior informed consent has not taken place. Almost, we also have, kind of public hearings for our projects, but they are a sham because as people know, they bring their own people to, represent on that day. And so I think, any investment or any funding that happens from the US government should strictly follow free prior informed consent. The second thing is that, when the communities say no to a project where land is being acquired in significant quantities or natural resources are being affected, then no should mean no, and they should withdraw their pushing for the project. I think if they are able to follow these basic, demands, then I think other things will fall in place. But we also know that governments in the developing countries, including our own country, India, the government also tries to push large projects, create the kind of documentation that is required to gain legitimacy, and often use force to enable pushing these projects. And quite often we find that international agencies or international governments keep silent, and they say that it is a national policy and they don't want to intervene, and therefore once the clearances are there, then we'll invest. So I think these are very fundamental issues when the US government thinks of investing in India or other developing countries.
Thank you so much, Sridhar. And Matthias?
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And thank you for the strong contributions from my colleagues in Kenya and India. I think what the US should do is, because we are speaking of community involvement or community engagement, but we should be able to create awareness to the community about the right to access to cleaner energy. And for example, those renewable energies that we are campaigning for, because also communities cannot get involved or engaged in something they don't know. So there must be a campaign, sort of a campaign or a global movement on making sure that community are aware on renewable energies, and they can be in a position now to engage with the government that this is the right source of energy that we want for our community, and they can even be able to engage at higher levels and even advocate for for changes in policies and investment of the government, because we said also there is a big play of the political will, the direction of the government. What does the government want? So sometimes if we empower the people, empower the communities, they can even inform the direction of the government. Because if the community says we want this kind of energy in our community, we want renewable investment in renewable energies because we have the potential for this, then it's sometimes for political reasons, the government could accommodate those demands, those asks from the communities. So I think there is a need for creating awareness to the communities on the right to access to cleaner energy, and we campaign for that. But second, which I think is also the role of the US government, is also to continue making sure that governments provide more civic space to CSOs or to communities to be able to express their views. The right to freedom of expression is very key in this fight. Even in the fight for climate change, the right to freedom of expression is very key, because in some of the areas, if you talk against the government, then you become in problems. So people decides to keep quiet, and when we keep quiet, things start to go in the wrong direction. So I think there is a need for the US government to continue emphasizing on increasing civic space to CSOs and community members. And also, we need to empower grassroots organizations that are working directly with communities, that are advocating for renewable energies and access to energy in the communities. And right now, I like this topic of grassroots leaders, because you bring together people who are working directly with the communities so that you can plan on how we can fight the issue of climate change together. So I think empowering grassroots organizations, grassroots leaders in terms of technical assistance and financial assistance, so that they can wage campaigns and movements at the grassroots level. This can really help to push the agenda for renewable energy access in the communities and in the globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for those words, and Sridhar before that to you as well. I think you raise really important points on conducting public hearings or consultations that are sincere and that aren't just there as a show, and hearing that no should mean no, right? This would seem clear to a child, but somehow it's not clear to governments and these institutions. And hearing the importance about awareness, right? Awareness raising and empowerment of the communities, the importance of civic space to a lot of this work, right? Because it's not just about changing energy systems, it's also about changing how we relate to each other, right? And how civil society and government work together on these issues. So I think you raise a really important point about the opportunity of climate change for us to change not only our energy systems, but also our representative systems. So thank you so much for your important points. Mumbere, we were discussing what are some of the ways that the US should involve communities in decision-making. Did you have anything to add here?
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to reconnect. My network is poor. I think what I can add is maybe the US government is to try to involve the community more in decision making, so that it can really find out how best the project is going to affect and help the communities before implementation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so my next question to all of you is, what are some renewables projects in your communities or in your country that you know about, whether they were financed by the United States or another country or institution. So if you have examples of some of these projects, what worked well with these projects and what didn't work well? Does anybody have any experiences to share about renewables projects?
Yeah, I think if one has to identify projects which have done well, is something which has to do with solar irrigation projects, which is at the farm level, where solar pumps are there and farmers are independent of the grid and are able to irrigate their lands. This has helped a lot of farmers who are away from the grid. And so if we look at, this has been funded by the Green Climate Fund, and I think there has been investment from other multilateral development banks in this. So once again, this is a kind of a distributed investment of solar, and with some subsidies so that the farmer can access this. What has not worked is large solar, where we find that a lot of huge amount of land, and generally they are said to be wasteland in India, and but they are grazing land of the community. They are they provide for a lot of other kind of biodiversity, and in some parts there are good land that is also being taken for these kind of renewable projects. So what has worked is, and what is likely to work, for instance, even investment on improved cook stoves have made a difference to a lot of rural women. But any of the larger projects have not benefited local communities, but have only ended up as speculative investments for people, large corporates, or returns to large corporates and private equity investors.
Thank you so much, sweetheart. You raised such important points, because it's not just about whether or not we do renewable projects, it's also how we do them, right? So that we don't contribute to more injustices or the continuation of injustices of the past. So your point about solar irrigation projects that are independent of the grid and that support farmers and improve cook stoves being beneficial, while larger solar projects that take a lot of land and don't necessarily meet the needs of communities are paths that we should avoid. So I think it's really helpful for us to, be able to bring these points to governments when we say, do more of this, do less of that, right? So that we can really make sure that renewables projects aren't perpetuating or creating new injustices. Thank you so much for sharing that. Did anybody else want to share ways that renewables projects that you know about have worked well or that haven't worked well? Matthias or Mumbere?
Okay. For Tanzania, I'm aware of some few projects that has been financed by the World Bank through the IFC and also through the IBRD, and these are focusing on providing access to energy for rural people. Though I have not really been able to monitor them to see to what extent they are really focused on making sure that rural communities get access to renewable energy, and to what extent this projects really serves the interests of the communities. So I think is that why I said in the beginning that it's important for civil societies, or for example, grassroots organizations that are within the communities, to be empowered so that they can be able to monitor this project and see to what extent these investments are really answering the asks and the needs of the community. So I do also know that there are some pipeline projects that are coming from the Green Climate Fund that they're also supporting such projects in Tanzania, and one of the areas that they will support is the area in around Lake Victoria, for also providing renewable energy to be also used for irrigation in agricultural activities to support particularly women and youth in the lake zone. So these are some of the projects that I know they are operating in Tanzania, and some of them are on pipeline coming.
Thank you so much, Matthias. Mumbere, did you have anything to add? If not, please feel free to jump in whenever. But we have 9 minutes left in this session, and so I just wanted to open it up to all of you to raise, any issues that we haven't touched on, or make any closing remarks, whether that's sharing experience or asks or observations that haven't been raised yet to the U.S. government. So I open the floor to whoever wants to make any final remarks.
I think a register of investments and type of investments that are being made could be a portal of that kind could be useful, so that people are aware of what is the kind of investments that is being made, where it is being made, so that it will help several groups to inform communities and also know about the nature of finances. Because for people to know who is investing, for the local community, the face is one local contractor or somebody who is acquiring land, or the local government. So even to raise issues, it is often very difficult, and they have to be dependent on several other civil society groups who also have focus on different issue areas only, to ultimately reach people who can make decisions. So I think that is something that the government can make it mandatory, that any investments of this kind on energy should be on a common portal.
Thank you so much, Srihar. That's a really important point. Thank you so much. Matthias or Mumbere, did you want to share any final thoughts?
Yes, I think this is a very productive debate that I think we should continue looking into as grassroots leaders, and see, for example, for me now, I have been more inspired to dig deep on these World Bank funded projects in Tanzania, and what are their impacts in the community, and if they have brought any significant change to the communities that have been implemented in, so that we can bring the communities to the understanding and to the awareness that they need to advocate for cleaner energy, they need to advocate for renewable energy, which is more sustainable in their communities. So I think we should continue involving communities. Also, we should continue empowering grassroots organizations to continue creating awareness to make sure that this agenda is also taken on board with the government, by the governments, that we are serious and we want change in the side of renewable energy and the kind of energy that we use, and we should do away with this harmful or not clean energy that currently most of the political decisions are going in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthias. And we are also inspired so much from everything we've been hearing here today. Mbere, did you want to say any final thoughts?
Yes, I think
Go ahead.
to add on what Matthias has said, also the cost of the project determines a lot, will determine the accessibility and affordability of the project. So we have learned that several projects that have been supported by the US financial agencies, they have been welcomed, yes, but in the long run, they have not achieved their target why they have been put in place because of the cost of the project. At the end of the day, the community members find it a little bit expensive to access the energy generated by these projects. So I think it would be wise if we try to look at the costs of these projects so as to achieve what we really want to achieve, because at the end of the day, the cost is transferred to the consumer and the consumer are the community members. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mumbere. Such an important point. I mean, if
Yeah.
we can set up all the technology we want, but if people cannot afford it, then it is not truly accessible. Matthias, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, that is very important question that Mumbere has raised. The issue of affordability is very key. For example, I said about Tanzania being able to distribute electricity to villages, and the challenge that we have learned from that is that energy is very expensive. Electricity is very expensive for people in the rural areas to afford. So you find that they can't even use for cooking. They cannot use for empowering the economy because it is very expensive. So I think it's important, even if we are pushing this agenda of renewable energy, it has to go with we have to go in mind that this technology or this energy that is going to rural communities, it has to be affordable. People have to really afford that so that they can use it as an alternative source of energy, so that it can also contribute to the fight of climate change that we are fighting right now. So if you dispute electricity in the villages, and then villagers to continue cutting down trees for firewood and burning charcoals, then we have not really helped. We are just trying to give light to the communities, but not really address the issues that we want energy to address. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Such important points. And I've kept my video off during the discussion just to help with broadband, but just turning it back on now just to say thank you so much for sharing your experiences, your wisdom, and your asks to the US administration. We hope that they will hear you, and they need to hear more from you. And so we hope that this isn't the last opportunity that we have. And as we say in Portuguese, estamos juntos, we are together with you to continue these very important conversations. So with 1 minute left, thank you so much again for joining this session. The next session will be facilitated by my colleague Sherelle Blazer with the Sierra Club, and will be about coal and a just transition. So stay on the same link if you want to stay involved with that discussion. But with that, we can close this particular session about renewables. And thank you so much again for your time.
Thank you very much. And